They said the mine stopped breathing the night Amos Harlow's lantern went out, and his wife started digging behind their house before dawn. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever stood somewhere that felt wrong before you even knew why. Because this story isn't just about loss, it's about what comes after, when the ground doesn't give back what it takes. In the fall of 1894, the people of Harlow Hollow learned that grief has a sound. It isn't crying. It isn't thunder. It's the steady scrape of a shovel at 3 a.m, a widow working by lantern light, whispering to the earth as though it could hear her. They say she never looked up when you passed her property, that she just kept digging, slow and even, as if she knew exactly where to find what she was looking for. Some claimed she was trying to bring her husband home. Others swore she was keeping something else down there. No one in that part of West Virginia ever said her name again. They only called her the widow of Harlow Mine. And if you listen closely, on nights when the wind moves through the old valley, you can still hear the metal edge of her shovel cutting through the soil, over and over, like she never stopped. There's something about the hollows of West Virginia that keeps sound trapped. Even now, if you stand where the Harlow Mine once opened its mouth to the mountainside, your own breath comes back to you in echoes, thin, delayed, uncertain whether it belongs to you at all. In 1894, Harlow Hollow was nothing more than a scattering of miner shacks and a company store built on stilts over wet clay. The air there was always thick, a mix of iron dust, smoke, and the faint sweetness of mountain laurel. Lanterns burned late, and the sky carried the dull orange haze of burning slag that never seemed to fade. By day, the mine hissed and sighed like a living thing. Men spoke to it the way sailors spoke to the sea, respectful, cautious, superstitious. They said it was bad luck to whistle underground. They said if you felt a draft where there shouldn't be one, someone who wasn't supposed to be there was passing you by. And when the collapse came that summer, it took 9 men and sealed them in the dark, their names scratched onto the company's ledger, but never carved into stone. After the accident, the mine foreman ordered the entrance sealed. They built a timber wall across it and nailed it shut. But everyone in town knew. You can board up a tunnel, you can shut a door, but you can't quiet something that was already awake. Martha Harlow's cabin sat on a small rise above the old shaft, just far enough for the ground to stop trembling, but close enough for her to still feel it through the floorboards. Neighbors said her lamp burned through the night, its faint light shifting behind thin curtains, the silhouette of a woman pacing back and forth, sometimes pausing near the window, as if listening for something only she could hear. The air around her land was different, colder. Still, even in summer, grass refused to grow near her well, and on the mornings after heavy rain, the soil behind her home appeared freshly turned, as though something beneath had tried to rise up, and she'd pressed it back down again. Harlow Hollow learned to live around her. Children were told not to look when they passed her fence line. Men stopped working the nearby ridge, claiming their tools went missing, only to return a day later cleaned and set neatly by their doors. At night, there was a hum that rolled through the valley, low and steady, like a heartbeat deep under rock. Most said it was just water running through the mine's old tunnels, but a few swore it carried words. A name, drawn out slow, spoken in a voice that didn't belong to the living. The widow never denied it. She only said, "The mountain doesn't forget its own." And with that, she'd turn away, dragging her shovel back toward the yard, where the soil stayed soft, no matter how many times she packed it down. The first sign came in early spring. Snow had barely melted off the ridge when men working near the creek noticed the widow's lantern glowing again after months of darkness. Every night, the same pattern. 3 short flickers, a pause, then one long, drawn-out beam that swung toward the mine entrance, before going still. From a distance, it looked like someone was signaling for help, or warning something to stay away. A week later, a boy named Eli Turner found boot prints in the thawing mud near the old shaft. They were deep, too deep for a woman of her size. And the second pair ended abruptly, halfway across the clearing, as though whoever made them had simply vanished mid-step. The widow said nothing. When questioned by the preacher, she only replied, "Don't follow what doesn't walk anymore." The foreman from the company, a man named Cyril Dane, grew tired of the talk. He said he'd go out there himself to prove it was nonsense. That night, he took 2 men with him, a rifle and a bottle of rye. By morning, only the bottle was found, standing upright on a stump beside her gate. The label was scorched, the glass warm to the touch. The men never came back. Word spread fast through the hollow. Miners stopped using the lower path that passed her home. Children said they saw someone standing by her well, a man-shaped shadow that leaned against the pump handle, swaying like it was listening to something underground. Then came the noises, soft at first, a tapping underfoot when she walked by, as if the earth was echoing her pace. Some nights it grew louder, turning into a steady rhythm that traveled through the soil, rattling dishes in nearby cabins, causing dogs to bark and then go silent all at once. The widow didn't flinch. She carried on with her work, scrubbing her husband's tools, laying them in a line along her porch, as though preparing for someone else to use them. Neighbors passing at dusk swore they heard 2 sets of steps behind her, hers and another that matched her stride exactly, but landed half a beat late. A farmer from the next ridge claimed he saw her at dawn, kneeling near a patch of overturned soil behind her house. She was humming, low, slow, the kind of tune mothers use to put a child to sleep. The same song miners once sang to calm their nerves before going underground. When he called out to her, she didn't look up, but the humming stopped. And from somewhere near the well, a second voice finished the melody. He never went near her land again. By midsummer, even the ground seemed uneasy. Rain refused to soak in. It beaded on the surface, black and slick. The trees nearest her home lost their bark in strips, exposing pale wood beneath that looked like bone under skin. The creek, once clear, turned a reddish color, and small fish washed up with no marks on them, just eyes clouded white. Still, the widow worked the soil every night. Shovel, pause, whisper, repeat. Sometimes her lamp would vanish for hours, then appear again near the slope where the mine shaft had collapsed, a faint, trembling glow deep within the fog. When folks tried to approach, the air turned heavy, their ears filled with pressure, like standing too close to thunder. Tools fell from their hands. Voices wouldn't come out. And then they'd see it. The widow standing by the ridge, motionless, her head tilted slightly, as though listening to something calling up from below. They said her lips moved, but whatever she answered never made a sound. By late autumn of 1894, Harlow Hollow had fallen quiet. The company store closed. Most families moved on to safer ridges. Only Martha Harlow remained, her lantern still burning through the night, casting slow, tired movements against the cabin walls. Then came the rain. For 3 days, water poured down the slopes, flooding the lower paths, turning the soil behind her house into black, sinking mud. And on the 4th morning, a passing horseman noticed her door standing open. Her lamp still flickered inside, but there was no sign of her. When the sheriff finally arrived, he found the house in perfect order. A kettle cooling on the stove, a single plate set at the table, and a Bible lying open to a passage about the valley of dry bones. But the floorboards near the back room were damp, and beneath the small iron bed, the wood had been pried loose, not broken, but lifted carefully, as if opened and closed many times before. The sheriff called for a lantern. The light caught something below. A narrow passage cut straight into the earth, just wide enough for a body to crawl through. They followed it. The walls were smooth, packed with bare hands. Candle stubs lined the edges, each melted into strange, looping patterns. The air was still, almost warm, and farther in, maybe 20-30 feet, they came to a hollowed-out space beneath the cabin. There, in the flicker of their lamps, they found what the widow had been digging toward all along. The ground was layered in burlap, each fold heavy with black dust and a faint metallic smell, coal, earth, and something older. Shapes rested beneath the wrappings, some small, some full-sized, each one sealed with pitch. At the head of every one lay a miner's tag, hammered into place with a nail from the old shaft. 9 in total, 9 names matching the company's missing men. But one of the wrappings was different, newer, stitched in rough linen that hadn't yet darkened from the soil. At its base, still damp, lay the handle of Amos Harlow's pickaxe, clean, polished, and carefully placed. When they turned toward the far end of the chamber, their lamps caught movement, the faint glint of eyes reflecting light. Martha Harlow stood there barefoot, mud streaked across her dress, her hands clasped as if in prayer. She looked calm, not afraid. When the sheriff spoke her name, she lifted her head slightly and said, "They were never dead. Just misplaced." Her voice didn't echo. It sank, absorbed by the walls, as though the ground itself had been waiting to hear it again. Then the sound came. A low rumble, deep beneath their feet, the slow, steady groan of shifting stone. The lamps trembled. Dust fell from above. Someone shouted for the exit, but the tunnel behind them had already begun to close. Later, when the rain stopped and the ground finally settled, the sheriff and his men were gone. The cabin stood empty, and where the back room once was, the floor had caved in completely. A black pit breathing faint warmth into the morning air. For 3 days, smoke rose from that hole. By the time it cooled, the cabin had collapsed inward, and the ground where it stood hardened like glass. No bodies were recovered, no tools, no lanterns. But weeks later, men working 2 ridges away found a single shovel buried halfway in the mud. Its handle was clean. The blade was polished bright, and etched along the metal, faint, uneven but unmistakable, was a name, M. Harlow. By the time the winter of 1894 passed, Harlow Hollow was nearly gone. The company foreclosed the store, the church bell was taken down and sold for scrap, and the mountain road leading to the mine grew over with moss and saplings. The few who stayed behind said they could still feel warmth coming up from the ground where Martha Harlow's cabin once stood. It was faint, just enough to melt frost in a perfect circle every morning, a breath rising from the earth like something living still turned beneath it. The county sent surveyors to inspect the collapse. Their official report described it as a subsidence event, likely caused by trapped gases from the old shaft. But none of the men who went up there ever spoke about what they found. 3 of them quit within a month. 1 left his equipment behind entirely. Local gossip filled the silence. Some said they heard tapping through their floors at night, the same steady rhythm of pick against stone. Others swore that on still mornings you could see footprints appear in the dew, fresh, heavy, leading downhill toward the old mine path, and fading before they reached the ridge. By spring, the story had turned into warning. Mothers told their children not to wander near the stream. They said if you heard humming, even faintly, you should cover your ears and walk away without looking back. Because what you heard wasn't a song. It was a call. Old miners passing through years later remembered Harlow Mine as cursed. They spoke of seeing tools appear beside their beds, handles damp, blades polished, and smelling wet soil as if freshly turned. Some even said they found linen-wrapped stones buried in their gardens, tied with twine and marked with initials. The stories changed over time, but one detail never did. The sound. That faint, patient tapping, like someone keeping time beneath the floor of the world. In 1912, an engineer named Samuel Boyd rediscovered the site. He wrote in his field notebook, "The ground feels hollow. When I press my ear to it, I hear a pulse. It is faint, rhythmic, human." He sealed the entry that same day and left town. His notes were later found in a trunk sold at auction. Inside, pressed between the pages, was a strip of coarse linen, darkened by age, stitched with 2 initials, MH. By the 1930s, Harlow Hollow had become a ghost valley. Nothing grew there. Even the birds avoided it, circling wide before perching on the far ridge. Locals came to call the place the Widow's Hollow. Hunters who camped nearby reported waking in the middle of the night to find the ashes of their fire neatly piled into small mounds, each marked with the imprint of a shovel blade. And in mining towns across West Virginia, men began to speak of something called the Widow's Shift. The hour between 2 and 3 in the morning, when old mines groan, lamps flicker, and those who have lost someone underground feel a tug in their sleep, as if called by name. Church records mention a final note written by the Harlow preacher before he left. The earth here remembers too much. It keeps what it's given, and it's never stopped listening for her. More than a century later, hikers who venture near the overgrown ridge say the ground still feels warm. They describe a faint scent of pitch and coal, and sometimes a woman's voice carried on the wind, soft, measured, counting each breath between the distant rhythmic sound of a shovel. There's nothing left of the Harlow Mine now, just an uneven stretch of ground, a few rusted rails, and a single chimney of brick standing where the cabin used to be. The county calls it Lot 17B. No plaque, no marker. You could drive past it 100 times and never know what's beneath. But some still stop. They bring flowers. Old mining families, descendants of men who once worked under Amos Harlow. They leave little piles of coal dust in a circle, as if offering it back to the ground. A few years ago, a group of students from the state university came out to record what they called residual sound phenomena. They said the equipment picked up rhythmic vibrations, soft, steady, like tapping metal through soil. The pattern repeated every 73 seconds. And when they left their recorder overnight, the next morning, it was buried under 6 inches of loose dirt. No footprints, no drag marks, just the imprint of something pressed down by hand. Locals still talk about the Harlow widow, though no one can agree on her name anymore. Some call her Martha. Some say it was Clara. One man who grew up near the ridge swears she never existed at all, that the company invented her to keep people from trespassing. But there's a story passed from one miner's son to another, that what she buried wasn't her husband's remains. That Amos Harlow came home from that mine, but he wasn't the same. And when he tried to speak, the only sound that came from his mouth was the low hum of the tunnels themselves. They say she stayed up 3 nights straight, digging with her bare hands, muttering something over and over, words no one could make out. And when dawn came, she covered the hole, and the humming stopped. For weeks afterward, she was seen carrying buckets of dirt to the creek, washing it until the water turned black. Then one night, her house went dark, and no one saw her again. Only her footprints remained, small, bare, pressed deep into the mud, leading to the place where the mine once breathed. And that's where the story ends. Not in a headline, not in a grave record, but in the quiet rhythm of something that still stirs beneath West Virginia clay. If you ever find yourself walking near that ridge, and you feel the ground warm beneath your feet, listen carefully. You might hear her counting, 1, 2, 3, and the faint, patient sound of a shovel, keeping time. Would you stand on that ridge if you knew the ground still remembers her name? Because they say the mine still breathes, but it's not the earth that's alive. It's what she buried, and it's still waiting to be found.